Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us is Dr. Ariel Cohen, senior fellow with the Atlantic Council, for an update on Russia and Ukraine. Ariel, it's great to see you again. Welcome back to Trade Talks.
It's a pleasure.
All right. And, we spoke last week and the world certainly has changed even more since then. Did anything come out of the peace talks that were held in the Belarus border?
Yes, they said they will continue the talks. The talks will be on the Polish-Belarusian border. Apparently, there were some harsh words traded, but the talks did not break down. My belief is that the Russians are still insisting that Ukraine will be demilitarized, whatever that means, and that it will not join NATO, and that's probably what they can achieve. The challenge is to recognize their territorial grab in the east, the Donbas region and the Crimea. Whether Ukraine would agree to that or not, I don't know. Today, Minister of Defense of Russia, Sergei Shoigu, said that the military operation will continue. We see Russia potentially committing war crimes by hitting residential areas with rocket attacks and vacuum bombs. These are war crimes that should be adjudicated in the Hague Tribunal. The sanctions are continuing to grow, and what affects the Russians is not just the economic sanctions, it's things like no more flights to Europe for Russian aviation companies. All of Europe is shut for them. And also in sports and culture, measures against Russian sports teams, and against Valery Gergiev, the famous conductor that lost his positions in Vienna and New York. That resonates with the Russian elites.
Right. So do you think these sanctions are going to work at the end of the day, Ariel? Because it's only hurting the Russian people, the Ukraine people, obviously. And then it's going to be incredibly difficult to do business going forward. Who is going to want to do business with Russia and reinsert its ties with energy dependence? Obviously, that's something that stands out.
Well, interestingly enough, President Biden does not smash the Russian energy sector. I actually came out with an article probably about a year ago saying that the only targeted sanctions that may change Russian behavior, I cannot guarantee that, is the energy, oil and gas in particular, sector, and both the Europeans and the US are refraining from targeting them. But on the same time, the sanctions against Russian bonds, Russian debt, Russian shares collapsed, targeted SWIFT sanctions, disconnecting SWIFT from some banks, is going to hurt the Russian economy, not just the people, the oligarchs, the rich cronies of Mr. Putin. The Russians will feel it both at the top and the population at large. The question is how much support Russia has, the Russian population provides to Putin right now. I've seen numbers as high as 2/3, 66%. But as the time goes by and the sanctions hurt them more and more, that support may deteriorate and the support among the elites may go down as well. I'm old enough to remember the war in Afghanistan. That was a 10-year war in which over the period of 10 years, the Soviet Union lost only 15,000 people, 1,500 per year. Today, we see numbers such as high as 5,000 in the few days of fighting in Ukraine, maybe even higher. It's very difficult in the fog of war to know how many soldiers Russia lost, how many soldiers Ukraine lost. And in the long run, I cannot see Ukraine winning this war, unfortunately. Ukrainian military is much weaker than the Russians. The Russians are pouring in massive forces towards Kiev, the capital, towards Kharkiv, the second largest city, the city I know very well from my childhood. My grandma used to live there. And it is unconscionable what the Russians are doing to that population.
And it's hard for us who have grown up in a democracy to wrap our heads around it, especially with the proximity to Europe. You know, in the United States, the states are all part of one country. In Europe, of course, and in Russia, everyone is separate. So it's hard for us to wrap our heads around it here. And of course, the human toll is really what the tragedy is. Ariel, what's worst case scenario? Do we insert, does the US and the EU insert themselves on the ground? I mean, that would obviously be worst case scenario.
Right, but I just want to clarify something real quick. Ukraine is a separate country.
Right.
The narrative about how Ukrainians are somehow Russians, this is a Russian imperialist narrative that existed under the Tsars, and then in the Soviet Union, they sort of had cultural autonomy, but they were still ruled from Moscow with an iron fist. Moreover, in Holodomor, the man-made starvation in the early 1930s, up to 6 million Ukrainians and other Soviets died, and Ukrainians still remember that. That explains why some Ukrainians collaborated with the Nazis in World War II, whereas the majority of Ukrainians fought in the Soviet army against the Nazis. So this notion about somehow the Jewish president of Ukraine is a Nazi that Putin said is nonsense. And the Russians are just trying to grab that territory and re-enslave the Ukrainians who don't want to be. Even the Russian people who live in Ukraine don't want to be ruled by Moscow.
So to wrap this up here, near term, what's best case scenario, right? Which we're hoping for. And reality, what do you think takes place? How long does this go on?
This probably will go on for another couple of weeks till the Russians crush the Ukrainian resistance, and then we are in a whole new era of Ukrainian resistance, what they used to call in the World War II partisan warfare, and the West will supply these resistance fighters with weapons and money. I hope and pray we're not going to escalate to nuclear. Nobody can win in a nuclear war, although in the Russian military doctrine that I studied, I must stress escalation to de-escalate, as they call it, to tactical nuclear weapons is prescribed. And I very much hope that if Putin uses nukes, it doesn't mean that we are at the start of a nuclear war. Putin may use very heavy weapons and cause a lot of civilian casualties in Ukraine, unfortunately.
Do you think the US and the EU insert themselves at some point, or then we're thinking about?
I think there may be. I already hear some voices that, from the humanitarian perspective, to save Ukrainian civilians, we may need to intervene and insert NATO air assets, airplanes to shoot down Russian planes. I am not seeing at this point anything like that happening. This is not Iraq. This is not Libya. This is a major nuclear power. And let's not forget, we have the threat of the Chinese invasion of Taiwan in the Pacific. US does not and should not be willing to fight two major battles, major wars in two distant parts of the world at the same time. That will be, I don't want to say suicidal, but that will be extremely, extremely difficult for our military, for our economy, and for our people.
All right, Ariel, we appreciate the insight as always. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.